I have been covering this league long enough to develop a very specific kind of radar for what a real rebuild looks like versus what a front office wants you to believe a rebuild looks like. And right now, something in Las Vegas is registering differently than anything I have felt from that franchise in years. Not decades of history differently, not Super Bowl window differently, just genuinely, structurally, organizationally differently. And I think a lot of people outside of Raider Nation are still sleeping on it. Let me be straight with you before I go any further. I am not here to sell you a dream. I have watched this organization chase names instead of building systems, spend money without a coherent philosophy behind it, rotate through head coaches and starting quarterbacks with a frequency that would be alarming for any franchise but somehow became almost expected for this one. I know exactly what a Raiders hype cycle looks like when it is built on nothing. I have been disappointed by this organization enough times to carry genuine scar tissue around it. So when I tell you that what is developing in the desert right now feels meaningfully different, I need you to understand that is not me getting swept up in off-season enthusiasm. That is me looking at the structure underneath the headlines and seeing something I have not seen from this franchise in a very long time. Something that actually connects. Fernando Mendoza is the name at the center of all of it. And if you are not locked in on this situation yet, I am telling you directly that it is time to start paying attention. Not because of the hype, not because the fan base is excited and excitement is contagious, but because there are real, specific, football-grounded reasons to believe this organization has finally found what it has been missing. And Mendoza represents the most concrete and visible expression of that. He is not just a quarterback prospect, he is evidence of a plan. Evidence that for the first time in a genuinely long time, there is an actual front office vision in Las Vegas that goes somewhere instead of just sounding good in April. Now I want to talk about the AFC West first, because that is where the conversation gets both fascinating and demanding of intellectual honesty at the same time. There is a take gaining real traction right now that the Raiders finish in the top 2 of this division this season. And my honest first reaction when I encountered it was measured skepticism, not dismissal. Measured skepticism, which is different, because the AFC West is not a division you casually climb just because you had a coherent offseason and a promising draft. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs are not a dynasty that dissolves because another team got its roster construction right for a year. The Chargers have offensive capability that makes defensive game planning genuinely uncomfortable. And the Broncos have graduated past the point where anyone with honest eyes still files them under rebuilding. This is a hard division with legitimate competition at every position in the standings. But here is the thing I keep wrestling with when I try to dismiss the top 2 idea too quickly. What Clint Kubiak has constructed in this roster is not just active, it is intentional in a way that creates a visible thread connecting every decision. The draft philosophy connects to the free agency approach, connects to the coaching hires, connects to the developmental framework. You can follow the logic from one end to the other. You can see what kind of football team they are building toward, what the finished product is supposed to look like, what identity they are trying to stake out in a division that has been owned by one franchise for the better part of a decade. That coherence is not something a front office can fake through press conference language. Either it shows up in the architecture of the roster or it does not. Right now, it is showing up, and for this specific organization with its specific recent history, that clarity of direction feels almost disorienting in the best possible way. Do I believe the Raiders win the AFC West outright? No. I'm not going to tell you something I do not actually believe just to make the sentence land harder. But finishing second, being the team that genuinely makes Mahomes earn it instead of offering him a comfortable afternoon, competing in every game through December instead of fading out of relevance when the weather turns, that is within real reach. And reaching for that standard, even falling slightly short of it, represents a kind of organizational progress this franchise has been incapable of producing consistently for far too long. Now I need to sit with the Mendoza question specifically, because this is where the conversation gets its most complex and its most interesting simultaneously. The idea that Fernando Mendoza starts week 1 has a lot of emotional energy behind it right now, and I completely understand the psychology driving it. When a fan base has watched its franchise cycle through quarterback after quarterback, each one arriving with some version of the same promise, and most of them delivering some version of the same disappointment, and then something genuinely different walks in the door, the impulse to want him out there immediately is not irrational. It is human. I feel the pull of it myself when I watch what Mendoza brings to this organization, and imagine what it looks like at full speed. But I have to be honest with you, my read is that Mendoza does not start week 1. And more importantly, I do not think he should, unless training camp produces something so unambiguously clear that the coaching staff has no legitimate choice left. Kubak has been direct about this. He has stated plainly that the competition will be determined by camp and preseason performance, that no outcome has been decided in advance, that the starting job will be earned on the field rather than awarded in a conference room. That framing is not public relations management. That is intelligent organizational behavior that reflects a real understanding of how young quarterbacks develop and how organizations protect the long-term investment while still competing in the short term. Kirk Cousins is in this building for reasons that go considerably deeper than just occupying a roster spot. A quarterback who has managed late-game situations with seasons on the line, who has been in hostile road environments when the crowd noise made communication nearly impossible, who has processed the specific gravity of an NFL game where the margin between winning and losing is measured in single decisions under maximum pressure. That experience has genuine and transferable value. Having Cousins start while Mendoza absorbs the speed and complexity of the professional game from the position of an observer rather than a participant. That is roster construction done with actual intelligence. That is how organizations protect franchise-level investments from being defined prematurely by circumstances they were never fully prepared to handle. But here is where I want to slow down and be precise, because I am not permanently closing the door on a Week 1 start for Mendoza. The NFL does not honor construction timelines. If Fernando Mendoza walks into camp and is simply, unmistakably, undeniably ready in a way that communicates itself without ambiguity across every single rep, then Kubak has to make the call that the evidence demands. Good coaches adjust to the reality developing in front of them rather than defending a framework they built before they had the information they now possess. This league's history is full of moments where the young quarterback nobody scripted as a Week 1 starter was under center by opening day because the evidence was simply too overwhelming to ignore. Those moments happen to organizations that have built the right culture and hired the right staff to recognize what they are actually seeing. I am not ruling anything out. I am saying it has to be earned so completely that the decision makes itself. Here is my honest projection for how this season actually unfolds. And I want to be specific because I do not want the nuance to get lost. The Raiders make the playoffs. And Fernando Mendoza is a meaningful part of why it happens. But the version of that outcome I believe in is not the one where Mendoza starts Week 1 and immediately operates at a level that embarrasses every skeptic in the league. The version I believe in is more grounded than that, and in some ways more compelling, precisely because of its groundedness. There is a real and traceable path where this season starts with Cousins providing professional competence and steady leadership, but not quite the dynamic quality that separates a playoff team from a near miss. And then somewhere in the middle of the schedule, the moment arrives where Mendoza gets his opportunity. And rather than flinching under the weight of it, he runs directly toward it. I have watched that exact story unfold in this league more times than I can easily count, and it never entirely loses its power, no matter how many times you have seen it. A team that appeared to be drifting toward another forgettable season suddenly catches a different kind of electricity from a young quarterback who has not yet accumulated all the fears that come with professional experience. That is genuinely what makes young quarterbacks with real tools and genuine football intelligence so dangerous in the right situation. They have not been told enough times what they cannot do. They have not absorbed all the lessons about which situations are supposed to exceed their current capabilities. They just go out and play with an unself-conscious confidence that becomes remarkably difficult to scheme against. Mendoza entering the lineup mid-season, catching fire, and carrying this organization into the postseason while the rest of the conference is looking somewhere else. That is not a romantic fantasy. That is a real, specific, football-grounded possibility. The pieces surrounding Mendoza in that scenario carry enormous weight, and the quarterback conversation absolutely cannot be extracted from the context of what is being built around him. Brock Bowers is already operating at a level that creates genuine problems for every defensive coordinator in this league on a weekly basis. There is not a linebacker or safety pairing that wants to dedicate significant mental energy to tracking his alignment, his leverage after the snap, his ability to generate yards in space after the catch. The gravitational pull he exerts on a defense creates openings for every other weapon on the field, and for a young quarterback still calibrating his reads against professional coverage, having a weapon like Bowers available as a reset option fundamentally changes what the offense can attempt downfield. That is not simply a good tight end. That is a confidence-building resource that allows a young passer to take the deeper shots because he knows what is waiting underneath when the aggressive option is not there. Ashton Jetu adds a vertical dimension that this offense has been missing in a way that previously limited what it could ask of its quarterback. When genuine big play ability exists alongside what Bowers creates in the intermediate game, defensive coordinators lose the comfort of sitting in coverage with predictable positioning. They have to account for multiple threats across multiple levels at the same time, and that kind of simultaneous stress produces the execution errors and coverage breakdowns that a sharp young quarterback can identify before the snap and punish after it. The offensive line operating as a genuine unit, rather than a collection of individuals surviving against each other, gives whoever is back there the time to work through a real progression, rather than making reactive decisions under collapsing pressure. That protection changes the psychological experience of playing quarterback at this level in ways that never appear on the stat sheet but show up in every critical third down situation when the game is genuinely in the balance. The defensive construction deserves honest attention as well, because I think people are undervaluing what is quietly developing on that side of the ball. Kubak did not treat defense as an afterthought to the offensive build. The acquisitions fit the schematic identity with specificity, rather than just filling roster space because the calendar demanded activity. A new defensive system in the NFL requires time, repetition, and the kind of genuine trust between players that only develops through shared adversity on the field. But by the midpoint of a season, if that defense develops along the trajectory its talent and scheme coherence project, this becomes a team that is genuinely uncomfortable to play against in the specific ways that decide close games in the fourth quarter. Defenses that make opponents grind for every score, that hold their structure when the game is tight and every possession carries maximum consequence, those defenses win games that more talented rosters lose. That is the competitive foundation Kubak is attempting to build, and the raw material is there to build it with. Now I want to address the biggest idea in this entire conversation directly, because it deserves serious engagement rather than reflexive dismissal. The possibility that Fernando Mendoza leads the Raiders to a championship in 2029 in Allegiant Stadium on their own field in their own city. When I first let that scenario fully land, the instinct was to treat it as pure passion talking, the kind of projection that exists more as emotional expression than as actual football reasoning. But I forced myself to work through the logic rather than defaulting to skepticism, and what I found underneath the ambition is genuine structural reasoning that is worth taking seriously. Think carefully about what 2029 actually looks like if this build executes at anything close to its current trajectory. Mendoza would be entering either his third or fourth full season as the unquestioned starter, carrying the specific kind of experience that only comes from surviving real professional adversity and growing through it. A coaching staff that has spent multiple years developing a precise understanding of his strengths and constructing a system designed around those specific strengths in increasingly sophisticated ways. Brock Bowers, in one of the peak productive windows of his career, operating within an offense that has had years to fully understand how to deploy him across every alignment and situation. Draft capital accumulated through intelligent current decisions, giving Kubak the continued ability to add complementary pieces through multiple cycles. An offensive line with genuine cohesion, built through actual shared experience. A defense that has been reinforced through several years of intentional acquisition around a consistent identity. That is not fantasy construction. That is the actual blueprint for how sustained NFL success gets built when a front office operates with real discipline over multiple years, instead of chasing the quick fix that always ends up being neither quick nor a fix. And the location adds a layer of meaning that transcends the football itself. The Raiders winning a championship in their own building, in the city they relocated to, in front of the fan base that made that journey and stayed through all the years when the on-field product did not deserve their commitment. That would be one of the most emotionally complete moments this franchise has ever produced. It would validate the move, validate the rebuild, validate every person who kept showing up when staying away would have been the rational choice. I am not writing it as a prediction. I am taking it seriously as a destination that becomes reachable if the execution continues to match the vision. What I keep returning to underneath every specific argument about division standings and week one starting decisions and playoff probabilities and championship windows is something more fundamental than any of those individual questions. This genuinely feels structurally different from the pattern this franchise has repeated too many times. Not emotionally different, structurally different. The difference is not in the press conference language or the offseason narrative management. It is in how a front office approaches an an entire draft cycle with a coherent philosophy, how a coaching staff talks about patience and development as actual operating values rather than words deployed to manage a room, how the roster pieces fit together conceptually rather than just existing in proximity to each other on a depth chart. Kubak is building something real. He is doing it with a clarity of purpose that this organization has needed for longer than it should have taken to find it. Fernando Mendoza sits at the center of all of it, not simply because the quarterback position is where franchises are defined, but because his presence here is the most visible and concrete proof that there is an actual plan with an actual future attached to it. Whether he starts in September, steps into the lineup in November, or spends a full season developing before his moment arrives, what matters is that he is here with the right tools, the right football intelligence, and the right organizational structure around him to give him a genuine opportunity to become what people in Las Vegas are finally allowing themselves to hope he can become. That hope is not blind. It is not desperation in a better outfit. The AFC West is not surrendering without a real fight. Week 1 is not coming as a gift. The playoffs require execution that cannot be guaranteed from here, and 2029 is a long road with an enormous number of decisions between now and then. But the direction is real. The foundation is real, and for a fan base that has been waiting a long time for something genuinely worth believing in, real is more than enough to build on.